Flight 571 of the Uruguayan Air Force is one of amazing survival, bravery, and the unbounded will to live that is inherent in the human spirit. What was supposed to be a happy journey to a rugby match in Chile turned out to be one of the most terrifying stories in modern history. It was a story that grabbed the entire world and demonstrated the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. The plane was carrying 45 passengers on October 12, 1972, the majority of whom were young men who were members of the Old Christians Club rugby team. Other passengers were friends and family members. Despite the fact that they were about to embark on a journey that was supposed to be a regular one from Montevideo, Uruguay, to Santiago, Chile, they were in buoyant spirits. It was clear that the Andes, with their snow-capped peaks and breathtaking landscapes, were in the distance. These mountains, on the other hand, were not only majestic but also cruel. They were an enormous natural fortress that would eventually become their jail. The Fairchild FH-22P-7D aircraft was not intended to be flown at high altitudes when it was first designed. The pilots intended to fly via a narrow pass and then accelerate their descent into Santiago in order to successfully negotiate the Andes. The plane took off once more on October 13th, following a brief stopover in Mendoza, Argentina. The skies were calm, which indicated that the voyage would be peaceful and uncomplicated. However, while the airplane was getting closer to the mountains, the weather conditions became more severe. While flying blindly into the storm, the plane was rumbled by the dense clouds and turbulence that it encountered. Devastating events occurred at 3:21 p.m. As soon as they were certain that they had conquered the mountains, the pilots started their descent. On the other hand, they were terribly off course, and when the aircraft emerged from the clouds, it was met with a towering mountain that was jagged throughout. Both of the pilots' frantic attempts to rise were unsuccessful. After the tail of the jet collided with the mountain, the fuselage was ripped apart, which resulted in a chaotic situation. The passengers were expelled from the tail portion into the frigid emptiness, and the air was filled with screams of dread as they happened. This caused the main body of the airplane to crash into the edge of a glacier, causing it to come to a violent halt. Additionally, one of the wings separated and began to spin away like a lethal blade. There were 45 passengers on board, and only 33 of them managed to escape the accident. They were all injured, and they were stuck in one of the most hostile locations on the planet. Challenges that were both immediate and overwhelming were encountered by the survivors. When temperatures dropped to 30 degrees Celsius at night, the air was thin at an altitude of 3,570 meters, 11,110 feet, and the air was thin. A sea of snow and ice covered the landscape, and there was no flora or wildlife to provide any source of sustenance. They were prepared for spring weather, not for an alpine winter, and their supplies were pitifully limited. They had a few chocolate bars, some nibbles, and bottles of wine that were swiftly rationed out. They decided to use the rubble as an improvised shelter, which served as a frail barrier against the unrelenting cold. Among the people who managed to survive were two medical students named Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino. Both of them took on the responsibility of being guardians. In order to treat injuries such as fractured bones, frostbite, and brain traumas, they worked for an extremely long time. Fernando Parado, who had a shattered skull and had already been comatose for 3 days, was one of the people who sustained the most critical injuries. In the end, his survival would prove to be an essential factor in their eventual rescue. As time went on, hope began to dwindle and eventually vanished. The fact that search attempts were being conducted was brought to their attention by a transistor radio that they were able to repair. However, they were also aware that the searchers were up against a formidable challenge. However, after 8 days of futile searching, the authorities decided to call off the rescue operation since the white fuselage was practically impossible to see against the snowy background. The revelation was a devastating blow to those who had Despite the fact that some people grieved and others prayed, Everyone was aware that the only chance they had was in their own inventiveness. They quickly grew preoccupied with hunger as their primary need. Due to the fact that there was no food left and there was no chance of foraging, they took a decision that both appalled and humbled individuals. They would have to ingest the bodies of their deceased friends, which had been preserved in the cold conditions, in order to save their own lives. There was a lot of thought put into this decision. Even though they were plagued by religious and moral conundrums, they had no choice but to starve to death. Canessa, who was pragmatic and motivated by instincts for survival, took the initiative and reasoned that the act was not dissimilar to communion in the most profound sense. It was an act of life from death. At a time when their predicament was already extremely precarious, tragedy struck once more on October 29th. The survivors were buried alive when an avalanche washed over the wreckage and buried them. Another 8 lives were taken from us. Those individuals who remained dug themselves out of the hole and came to the conclusion that any longer waiting for help was not an option. In order to get out of the mountains and get assistance, they started making plans for an expedition. The preparation takes several weeks. They constructed clumsy snowshoes, fashioned sleeping bags out of the insulation that was found in the seats of the airplane, and rationed every calorie that they could have in order to ensure that the more powerful members of the group would have a chance to survive. On the 12th of December, Parado, Canessa, and Vizintin embarked on a journey towards the west, with the belief that Chile was located beyond the mountains. The voyage was quite difficult to endure. Temperatures dropped to such a low level that they were in danger of expiring from the cold. As they made their way through snowfields and descended down steep ice walls, their energy began to dwindle with each step they took. After a period of 3 days, Vizintin, who was experiencing weakness and was aware that his presence put the lives of the others in danger, offered to go back to the crash site. A solitary effort was made by Parado and Canessa. The torture that they endured lasted for 9 agonizing days. They climbed to a top that revealed the entire extent of their seclusion, which consisted of mountains that stretched on forever and were visible for as far as the eye could see. More than that, however, they saw a valley that was verdant and bustling with traces of human civilization. While they were making their way down into the valley, they came upon Sergio Catalan, a Chilean farmer who was taking care of his cattle. It was a weird moment when they finally met each other. In the event that they were unable to traverse the swiftly moving river that separated them, they scribbled a fervent request for assistance on a piece of paper and hurled it across the water. At that moment, Catalan understood, and he galloped off to seek assistance. 20 minutes after the collision occurred, helicopters arrived at the scene and rescued the 14 people who had survived. Their struggle had lasted for a total of 72 days. The survivors emerged as living marvels, despite the fact that they were malnourished, frostbitten, and mentally damaged. Books, documentaries, and the critically acclaimed film Alive were all inspired by their story, which captivated the entire globe. In spite of the fact that it is a story of survival, sacrifice, and the relentless drive to live, it continues to be a terrifying yet uplifting monument to what humanity are capable of enduring when faced with overwhelming odds. The story of Flight 571 is, in many ways, a beacon of hope and resilience that shows how boundless the possibilities are in human determination. This is a lesson to the world about what strength, even in the face of the most unimaginable adversity, the human spirit can achieve. What had begun as one of the worst disasters was transformed into an extraordinary example of bravery, ingenuity, and unity power. If you decide to act, armed with patience and guided by humanity, there is no limit to what you can do. The survivors of this harrowing ordeal are a living proof of this principle. Their journey was not just about surviving against all odds, but about discovering a wellspring of inner strength they never knew existed. They showed that with sheer willpower and unwavering determination, one can overcome even the most insurmountable challenges. Their story echoes the age-old truth: where there's a will, there's a way. They were marooned in a hostile land, with hunger, cold, and the pain of losing loved ones. However, they never gave in to despair. Instead, they adapted, innovated, and fought with everything they had. Their decision to stay on and their survival ultimately stand as a very powerful reminder that even at our darkest hours, hope can light the way. It is no wonder that this tragedy is often called the miracle of the Andes. This tragedy symbolizes not only survival, but the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It reminds us that when we are united in purpose, fueled by hope, and guided by the belief that nothing is impossible, miracles can indeed happen. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.